If you're a drummer just getting started playing with others, or you want to play with others soon, then you've got to dive into today's lesson with me. Without implementing these 3 essential skills we're talking about today, you'll be that obnoxious drummer at the restaurant who scares customers away and causes the venue to lose money. Seriously. But if you do take action today on these 3 critical skills, the band will be like, wow, we've got a great drummer here. And the audience will be like, wow, this band is amazing. We don't know why, but this band's amazing. But you'll know why. So join me today on uncovering the 3 skills that make a drummer sound good with a band, as well as 3 things you can be doing along the way, 3 actions you can be taking in order to sound more like a session drummer more quickly. And so that's going to be pretty cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. You can do this. Here we go. Hey, welcome to the Non-Glamorous Drummer. I'm so glad you're hanging out today. I help self-taught beginner drummers know what to practice so that they can nail songs and ultimately sound great with a band. And hey, today is all about sounding great with a band and all that entails, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But hey, before we get rolling, a gift for you, free gift for you if you're new or if you're not new for that matter. I have a free PDF guide in the description for you that's going to help you out with your coordination. If you've ever struggled with playing the ideas in your head, and you have a hard time like translating something that's here down to here where it actually sounds good, you need to grab my Play What's in Your Head 30 Days to 4-Way Rock Coordination e-guide. It is a step-by-step, 1 groove a day, 30-day system. So you just learn this groove today, then learn this one tomorrow. We're gradually layering in new levels of challenge so that after those 30 steps, you've built significant 4-way rock coordination, which is pretty awesome. Even if it takes you longer than 30 days, that's not the point. The point is that it is step-by-step and you're having fun learning grooves that you actually use in music and that you'll use on gigs and use playing songs. And so have a lot of fun with that. So many of my students have just gotten tremendous results just from that simple e-guide. So it's yours for free. Go grab it. And that's going to really be a great companion today because interestingly enough, an underlying skill that helps a lot with sounding great with a band is coordination. We're going to talk about really some deeper things that go beyond that, but that is a big underlying thing because if you don't have coordination, if you can't play what's in your head and have your limbs on autopilot, you're going to have a hard time sounding good. And so that's kind of an assumed prerequisite. So I want you working on that as well. But hey, I'm guessing if you're here today, you're new to playing in a band or you're wanting to soon, and you have no idea what you need to do or change in order to sound really good with that band. I remember the frustration of this was when I was in late high school, early college. I was first starting to play with other professional musicians. I say other, I was not a professional musician. I was first starting to play with professional musicians, and I was basically realizing how bad I was. Like how even though I had some chops, even though I could play some flashy things, I didn't sound good. I wasn't laying down grooves. I didn't have a great pocket. I wasn't really playing the right things at the right time. My kick patterns were wishy-washy. All these issues were going on. And it was really hard to pinpoint what was happening. And I remember some kind musicians giving me feedback on certain things and calling me out for stuff I needed to be called out for. But at the same time, it was frustrating because I was having a hard time really figuring out, so what are the big qualities that make a great band drummer? That was hard to figure out as a young beginner drummer at the time. Thankfully, after playing a whole bunch of gigs and after really getting some really good mentoring and coaching from a local professional drummer who was kind enough to help me out, really, I was able to boil it down to these 3 big things that really do make a drummer sound good with a band. If you implement these 3 fundamental qualities of a great band drummer, then your band and audience will be thankful to have you in their group. They will be proud to have you, a great drummer, in their band if you're implementing these 3 things. So here we go. Skill number 1, good time and dynamics. So I know this kind of sounds like 2 things, but they work very closely together. There's something I like to call the drumming theory of relativity, and this is nowhere near as complex as Einstein's theory of relativity. But what's very interesting to me, so Einstein's theory is all about the relationship between time and space. You know, gravity affects time and et cetera, et cetera. So it's very interesting how in drumming we have time and we have dynamics, and they're very closely related. And if your time is perfect, let's say you have perfect time. It's pretty much impossible because we're human, but let's say you do. Let's say you have perfect time, but your dynamics are not even and your dynamics are sloppy and wishy-washy. In other words, your volumes are not good, appropriate, and consistent. Then the audience will perceive your playing as having bad time. Dynamics are the even more obvious thing that an audience will notice. If you speed up a little bit or you slow down a little bit, most people won't notice, but if your dynamics are all crazy, you get way loud when you're not supposed to, or one snare hit is louder than another, and things are just haphazard, that's going to feel more shaky to your audience. And so something that is equally, if not more important than great time is even, steady dynamics. Now, the drummer's number one role, this is something I heard another drummer say, and I completely agree with it. Drummer's number one role is to play great feeling time. Where does great feel come from? Well, great feel is that combination. It's that intersection of time and dynamics, but especially dynamics. Go listen to any Led Zeppelin song, any Beatles song, a lot of stuff from the 60s and the 70s before drum machines were a thing, before bands were recording to a click. Listen to any of those recordings and you'll notice how they feel great, but the time is all over the place. I even heard about a Beatles tribute band where they would play Beatles covers and they would create a click track that followed the Beatles tempo. So they would play the Beatles song with all the tempo changes because that was an essential part of the feel. And sometimes in certain music, it's essential that maybe we push a little bit, lay back a little bit. September by Earth, Wind and Fire, that song gradually gets faster throughout. But you know what stays super steady throughout September? The dynamics of the drum part. It's nice and strong. It's relentless, and it's just constant, steady, and driving. There's not, sudden dynamic changes that make it feel haphazard. It's super steady. And so even as the tempo ramps up just a little bit, it doesn't feel weird. It's so solid because dynamics are even more critical than time. So the thing to be focusing on here, interestingly enough, is your hand technique. We've got a whole bunch of lessons on that here on the channel. If you've been a longtime follower of the Non-Glamorous Drummer, you know we're big on hand technique here because of how critical that is as a fundamental technique to good drumming. If you don't have good hand technique, you're going to struggle the rest of your life. So I'll link some of those lessons below. But if you've got good, smooth technique that allows smooth singles, that is the fundamental foundation for good time and good dynamics. Because if you have smooth, relaxed technique, it means you can go. Everything's so smooth and even and steady, or you can control your dynamics with something like this. Intentionally going loud, soft, intentional ghosting. You have control over those dynamics, and you can't have all that control without good hand technique, or at least if you do, you're having to try really, really hard. You have to try really hard to play steadily, dynamically, and time-wise if you're gripping tight and you don't have smooth motion. So that smooth motion is critical. So if this is something that you know you're struggling with, you're like, I have a hard time being just steady and even, I feel like I can't get into the groove, can't get into the pocket, that very well could start with hand technique. However, getting into our second thing here, second thing that makes a drummer sound good with a band, listening. So listening is super critical, and without that piece of the puzzle, there's not the feedback loop between your limbs and your brain. You have to be listening to what you're doing so that you're constantly adjusting and making sure that everything feels really good. If the listening aspect were completely removed, how would you know what you sound like? And so you have to be paying attention to that. Now, there's so many things to be listening for, and I think where the big frustration I remember having with this one, kind of when I was, intermediate, becoming a more advanced drummer. I was playing in jazz band in college, and our jazz band director would always tell me things like, listen, try to listen more. The best drummers out there, they can hear grass grow. I remember him saying that over and over again. And I was always frustrated by it because I was like, okay, so I know I should listen, but what should I be listening for? Like, give me something specific here. And that's what I needed so badly, and it took a while to really figure out what he was talking about. So I'll try to kind of approach this a couple of angles here. Evidence of good listening is that the drummer plays the right parts and fills at the right times. If you've ever had the question of how do I know what fill to play and when to play it, or how do I know what groove to play and when to play it, if maybe you're improvising parts, listening is how you know all of these things. Also, paying more attention to what others are playing than what you yourself are playing, that's a big one. Now, in order to do that, that's where the coordination comes in. So if you've accomplished that thing number one of good time and dynamics, that means your grip is loose, you've established motion. That also applies to the feet. That means you've got a nice loose beater bouncing motion. You're getting great sounds out of everything because you're being relaxed and you've got good motion to what you're playing. We've got all sorts of lessons on that here on the channel. We could talk all day about this, but we got to move on from that. If you've established that, you've got the technique down. If you're listening well, that means you've taken care of coordination because you've got your playing on autopilot. Now, I say autopilot, it doesn't mean that you have no awareness of what you're playing. On the flip side, it means you have a lot of awareness of what you're playing, but you're not having to work hard to play it. It's just like the CPU of a computer. As you build your coordination, it's like your hard drive is getting bigger. It's like your processor is getting more powerful. And so you're no longer maxing out your CPU. You're no longer hitting a technical ceiling. And so you're not having to try as hard. You're not having to think as hard. So what does that mean? It means you've got all this extra brain space you can devote to listening. That's why I told you, that's why I pitched you the free PDF guide on coordination. If you don't have that guide, you've got to get it because you've got to build your coordination. That's a fundamental prerequisite. If you're not working your technique, smooth technique, you're not building coordination, it's very difficult to actually fully implement these three things we're talking about today. But when you do have those first two things taken care of, this whole third category of drumming, which we can put into that music, listening, time, feel, pocket category, this all starts to happen naturally and come together and be a lot more fun and a lot less frustrating. And so I really hope you hear me on that. Technique and coordination are fundamental things to always be working on, and that's going to help you with all of this today. Now, to get even more specific with the listening, so what should you be listening to? Let's say you've got the coordination done and your playing is enough on autopilot that you're able to shift your focus more to others in the band or the song you're listening to through your headphones instead of just having to think about what you're playing. Let's say you've gotten there. What should you be listening to? The big thing is melody. This was something I learned from, this is probably my all-time favorite drummer, Aaron Sterling. Aaron Sterling is an LA session drummer who he's played on so many of my favorite records. He's an incredible drummer. I went to his master class a few years ago and got to ask him questions and pick his brain on some things. Amazing drummer. Search him, look him up on allmusic.com to find credits and find what records he's played on. But something Aaron Sterling talked about in some podcast interviews years ago was the importance of melody. And this was something I asked him about when I went to his master class in Nashville a few years back. And he talks about how the most important thing for him as the drummer to be listening to as he's recording is not the bass, it's not even the guitar or the piano. 99% of the time, the most important thing to be listening to is the vocal. And so he always insists with whatever artist he's working on that you send me a good vocal. I've got to have a good vocal to work with because otherwise I'm flying blind. And it's totally true because when you think about, the vocal is the most important part of the song in most styles of music. And your drum fills are going to either reinforce that vocal or they're going to offset that vocal. And so if somebody sings a line like, I'm totally making up randomness here. But you get the idea. What you'll find as you study music, as you critically listen to songs, the melody, the singer will stop, and then maybe a fill happens, or a guitar lick happens, or a bass lick happens. But these other elements are kind of the ear candy to fill space left by the vocal. Nobody needs to overshadow the vocal. The vocal is the core, the most important part of the song. And so we always want to base our playing around that, and we want to be listening to the other musicians so that if a guitar lick is happening, we know not to bury that with a fill. If a bass lick is happening, we know to either reinforce that with what we're doing maybe on the kick drum, or to just lay off and not play. Or if nobody else is doing anything and there's an obvious gap that we need to fill, or we're going into a big chorus, boom, 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 blah, 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 boom, then we need to play what we need to play. All of that comes down to listening. We're paying attention to the melody. And so when you're learning songs, when you're learning songs for fun, when you're learning songs to play on a gig, the big thing to make sure you're learning isn't just the drum parts, it's the melody. Make sure you can get that song stuck in your head and play it back in your head and sing it in your head, which is the thing that I think we all do naturally because, think about popular hit songs over the years that we get stuck in our heads, like Bohemian Rhapsody. I always use this song as an example. Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen is one of the least simple songs out there. It's so complex and all over the place. It's basically a musical, but yet we get it stuck in our heads and we remember the words and we remember the melodies and the feel and the tempo changes because we've listened to it over and over again. So it's funny how that works. We tend to remember those things better than the drum parts because the vocal is the core of the song. And so allow yourself to do that. Allow yourself to pay attention to the vocal, the core of the song, and learn that, because that's going to inform everything else you do. Okay, I know there's even more we can talk about with this, because listening is just something we can go so deep with. And there's a million examples out there, but the main thing I encourage you to do is go listen to music. Listen critically and pay attention to this. We'll talk a little more about that when I share with you the 3 things that will help you get to the session drummer level and sound better with a band once we get past these 3 skills. 3 skills and then 3 things to be doing. 3rd skill that makes a drummer sound good with a band: playing less notes. So we've all been there. I chuckle because I've been guilty of this. Maybe you have too. And we've all heard drummers where, maybe you're sitting at a restaurant, and so back to what I was talking about in the intro, an obnoxious drummer that's scaring away customers and causing the venue to lose money. Either they're scaring away customers because they're playing super loud, they're not listening, they're oblivious to how they actually sound and what the room sounds like. It's unfortunate, but way too many drummers are like that. They're just not paying attention. Or they're playing way too many notes, and they're blazing around the kit, and they're showing off their chops because they're so insecure about their groove, their feel, their time, and their dynamics. They're so insecure about that first thing, and they're so unable to do that second thing of listening. So they're insecure about their time and dynamics. They don't know how to listen. Therefore, they're overcompensating by playing too many notes. I've been there big time. Trust me. I've been there where it's like, I don't know if I'm a good drummer. I don't know what to do to be a good drummer. So I'm just going to play a lot of notes, and maybe that'll compensate for it. So we've been there. I get it. I know that feeling. What you have to do is be secure in knowing that, all right, I have a good groove, I have good time, good dynamics, therefore I have a good pocket, a good feel, I'm listening, therefore I'm going to be confident in my abilities, and I'm not going to overcompensate by playing too many notes. That's the mental space you have to get into. And interestingly enough, this is also evidence of good listening. If you're listening well, you're not going to play too many notes. So each of these things goes after the other, right? So if you've got the good time and the dynamics, then you're then able to listen. And if you're listening, you're not going to play too many notes. And remember that all of these things follow good technique and good coordination. And so if we wanted to broaden this into 5 skills, the first thing is hand technique, second thing is coordination, then time and dynamics, listening, and then comes the simplifying, playing less notes, just being very aware of what you're playing. Each thing helps with the next. Nobody's ever been like, man, that drummer didn't play enough notes. That was lame. I really wish that drummer played more notes. Just wasn't a good drummer, didn't play enough notes. I've never heard anybody say that, and nobody's ever given me that feedback. Like, man, you should have played more notes. Your fills weren't busy enough. Nobody thinks that way because people are listening to music. They're listening to the melody, to the vocal, to the band, not to the drummer. Your goal is not to be a solo drummer. Your goal is to support the band. So 9 times out of 10, playing less notes is a good thing. I remember listening to recordings of myself. These were board mixes from rehearsals, which was great because I could hear, through headphones, guitar, piano, bass, drums, hear everything really well. I remember listening back to those and hearing, I should have played less right there. And reaching those points of maturity and noticing, okay, in these moments I need to play less, in these moments I need to do this. And so listening to recordings really helped out with this, with playing less notes. I'll share with you a little more about this because now let's get into 3 action steps that you can take. 3 things that will most quickly push you to the session drummer level. So we've talked through really all the fundamentals, all the givens, the 3 skills you got to have to sound good with a band. But here are 3 things you can be doing, actively doing, taking action on as you're playing with other people, as you're beginning to play in bands, jam with other people. One of these things you can actually do even before then. First thing, it goes along with what I was just telling you. Listen to recordings of yourself playing with a band. Because what you need to do is get a feel for what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And you learn that by listening back to recordings. You'll hear a recording of yourself playing a fill and you'll be like, that fill did not feel right. Okay, let me listen to that a few more times. What fill would feel right? This is mental work. This is not physical drumming. This is mental work. You're thinking, what fill would have actually felt right there? Okay, let me correct that in my head. Next time I'll play that fill. Or you're listening to the groove and you're like, that groove doesn't sound or feel quite right. What can I do differently? Okay, that's what I can do differently. Let me do that next time. And so you're making the series of small improvements by listening back to yourself. Record rehearsals, record gigs, and that's how you do that. And so what'll happen is the more you do that, this won't take that long. If you're playing regularly, you're doing this regularly, after a few months, you'll find that you're developing this instinct to know in the moment on the fly whether or not this will feel good. You know right as you're playing, hey, this fill will feel good. This one will not feel good, so I'm going to not do this. Okay, this groove will feel right in this moment. This will not. This will be too abrupt, but this won't. This is too subtle. This will be more impactful. I can play this. And so you'll develop these powerful instincts that you have to have as a recording session drummer and that you have to sound awesome with a band 100% of the time. And so I honestly don't think there's any way to get there other than playing with people and making a lot of recordings, listening back to those, and not being afraid to listen back to those. That's the big thing. That's kind of a mental shift. That's definitely a mindset thing, being willing to self-critique and self-analyze. And so you become way more self-aware of where you stand, where you are, what you need to work on, and that is how you grow crazy fast. Okay, second thing to be doing that'll quickly push you to session drummer level, play cover gigs that are full of improvising and creating on the spot. So if you are fortunate enough to play with friends, even if it's just playing with buddies who jam a lot, and you get really comfortable just playing and not knowing where you're going, that's awesome. Better yet, if you can join a cover band that does that, where you jam on songs. And so you're playing 3-4 hour gigs full of jamming and listening to each other, looking at each other. People are taking solos. You're getting loud, then you're getting soft. And so it's so much listening and creating on the spot. That is invaluable. That is a huge skill. The only way to really gain that skill of knowing what to play and when to play it is failing over and over again at knowing what to play and when to play it. And if you fail enough times, eventually you succeed. There's a Michael Jordan quote somewhere about that where he talks about how many free throws he's missed and how many shots he's missed. And he's like, and so that is why I succeed, because I failed over and over again, and so that's why I succeed. And when you look at any successful people out there in the world, that's pretty much what they'll tell you. You got to fail a bunch. And so the best way to fail is to play a whole bunch of gigs. You will fail, but you'll get really good at this. Okay, third thing, and this is something you can do right now if you're not yet playing with a band and you're planning to soon. Listen to albums front to back over and over again in the car and through headphones. After all, how can you expect to master a skill, master an instrument, without listening and learning from the best of the best? And so whether it's hit albums, whether it's your favorite band, whether it's just classic records everybody should listen to, the point is listen to music a bunch so that you develop an aural repertoire. You develop a sense of all these things that you can play, fill ideas, groove ideas, but more importantly, you develop this sense of how to put them together, what feels right in what moment. You cannot get good at playing with a band without listening to other bands. It's so ridiculously obvious. I shouldn't even have to say it, but I was guilty of not paying attention to this and not listening to music enough. This was one of those ridiculous things where a drumming mentor had to sit me down and tell me, hey, the biggest thing you lack is really using your ear and paying attention to what you're playing. Here's how you do this. You sit and you listen to the songs over and over and over again. It's always amazing to me now. So I look back and I remember I was guilty of this. And so I have to not be so shocked by this, but so many students of mine, when they're having trouble learning songs and they're like, yeah, I don't know what to play, when to play it. I don't know if I sound good. It's too hard to learn songs. It's too hard to remember how a song goes. And I'll always ask them, so how many times are you listening to the song before you sit down at the kit? They're like, I'm not really doing that. And so I'm like, it's obvious, right? But yet I know that I was guilty of the same thing. And so thankfully, a drummer way better than myself sat down with me and said, this is what you need to be doing, and pounded it into my head. And so I started doing it, and it made a world of difference. And suddenly I started playing the right parts that felt right. My groove felt better. My fills were correct. I was sounding better with the band, and my playing was actually making the band sound better, not distracting from the band sounding better, because that's the worst case scenario. And so listening to music, listening to songs over and over again, listen through headphones so you really hear detail, but also listen in the car so that you're just listening over and over again on your commute, whenever you're driving. That's how you get really good at this stuff. It's so simple, but this is how you do it. So here's what will happen when you work on these 3 skills. You'll develop a much higher self-awareness, knowing how good you sound and where your playing needs work. That's critical. That's how you grow fast. Number 2, the band will be like, hey, wow, we've got a great drummer. And they'll be thankful to have you around. You will be an essential member of that band because they will know that you are helping them sound better and you are helping guide them through songs with your playing. Third thing, the audience will be like, wow, this band sounds amazing. We're not really sure why, but you will know why. A lot of people don't realize that a band sounds great because the drummer's playing at the right volume and is playing well and actually is tying the band together and is keeping everybody nice and tight. You can have a mediocre band, but a great drummer, and they'll probably sound pretty good. You could have a great band, but switch out the drummer for a terrible drummer, and that band's not going to sound good. The drummer is such a critical member of the band. Drums and vocal. I would argue that drums and vocals are the most important things. You got a bad singer, no good. You got a bad drummer, no good. But if you've got a great drummer and a great singer, everybody else is like subpar, the band is still gonna sound pretty good, honestly. So you can be the drummer that your band wants to have, that your band is proud of having, and they're like, yes, I'm so glad we have you in our band because you sound great. You can do this. Question for you as you go. Which of those 3 skills is your weakest? Is it time and dynamics, or is it listening, or is it simplifying your parts and playing less notes? Just think about that. You can answer in the comments below, but it's more just food for thought. I want you to do some self-analysis and be thinking about what you need to work on. As always, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to grab that 30-day coordination guide. If you're having trouble playing what you hear in your head, you need to build some solid coordination so that you can do all this fun musical stuff. Go grab my free guide, 30 Days to 4-Way Rock Coordination for the Beginner Drummer. It's helped out thousands of drummers before you. It's gonna help you out a ton too. As always, I will see you on the next video. Stay non-glamorous. You can do this.